This episode is made possible by our generous patrons.
Welcome to episode 115 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book
And then see the movie.
I'm Luke.
And I'm James.
And this week we discuss the first half of James S.A. Corey's 2011 novel, Leviathan Wakes. So James, I'm curious, have you ever read a space opera before?
I think I have, but if I did, I don't remember any of the titles. Because reading the story reminded me of sci-fi books that I was reading growing up, just reaching out and grabbing anything and reading it. I don't know. It's something about it seemed really like a simplistic sci-fi story at first.
Interesting. I don't know if I'd call this simplistic. It's pretty complicated, but
I would just mean setup. Okay, so we sent off a shuttle to go check on some distress beacon, and then the main ship gets attacked. I feel like that's
right.
a pretty...
Okay, so you're saying it starts simple enough, and then it sort of widens out from there. I agree with that. Yeah, and that's actually probably the strategy, is to give you an entry point that's not overwhelming. What do you know about James S.A. Corey?
Nothing that I know of.
Okay.
You tell me.
Do you know that he is not a single person?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he is a pen name adopted by two writers who co-author these novels.
Interesting. That's a first for us.
Yeah, that is. I think that is a first for us. Yeah, I think we've dealt with some other pen names, but this is our first team of authors, I think. Unless we're forgetting one, and someone will let us know. But yeah, so Daniel Abraham is a fantasy sci-fi writer who had some success. He'd written a couple trilogies, done some comics. Had collaborated in the past with George R.R. Martin. Specifically, at a certain point, he adapted a Game of Thrones into a graphic novel. So he had collaborated with George R.R. Martin. And the other author in this combo is Ty Frank, who was the personal assistant to one George R.R. Martin.
Wow.
What do you think of that?
That's crazy. I had no idea. That's so weird.
Yeah.
So they teamed up and they were like, let's take on the world.
Yeah, it seems like it. From what I could tell, the pair collaborated over an idea for a MMO RPG that they had. They wanted this to be an MMO RPG. And so they started coming up with all this world building, right? And then I think they did some preliminary feelers they're putting out there, and it seemed like it wasn't going to happen as an MMO, so they shifted focus and they started developing it as a tabletop RPG. So it's kind of interesting because what they actually started doing was playing games of this as a tabletop RPG with their friends. And reportedly, they actually came up with several of the characters that are in this book through these sessions. And
wow.
they would sort of explore the universe that they were setting up. And I guess they got to a certain point where they realized that they had enough story to where this should really be a novel. And they decided to co-author it. Yeah, I'm sure there's more to the story than that, and people can let us know if they've heard more. But that's what I was able to ascertain from my research.
That is so interesting. That's crazy because that's kind of the dream, right? You're playing in a tabletop game with RPG with your friends or something, and then you're like, this story is so great, and it's so close to you that you can't really tell if it's great or not. But
right.
Writing it down and actually going forward with the stories that you're playing through, that's actually really cool.
Yeah, and it actually is, because look at the success this thing's having, and it's compelling. And one of the things that I was really taken with was the level of, I'm going to call it world building, even though what we're really doing is building the solar system, the universe, right? But
Right.
The shorthand is world building, because I was so impressed with all the detail and all of the just setting up these different factions from Mars to Earth to the Belt, and how these factions all interacted with each other, and the politics already existing there. Then down to the nitty gritties of life on a station on Ceres, and what it's like to be on a ship, and really a pretty hard science approach. I've heard this described as hard sci-fi. I've also seen in some of the reviews that I read that it's not really hard sci-fi. So once again, we're encountering. It's going to depend on people's definitions, and you know what I mean? Because I think there are some people who say something's hard sci-fi, but as soon as they spot like one or two things that aren't easily explainable by like everyday, like the science that we have now, they immediately go like, well, it's not hard sci-fi then.
Right.
Whereas I don't think that's. I think if you look at something like The Martian, where even Andy Weir has said he fudged a little bit of like one specific thing in order to do the setup, I don't think anyone's going to argue that The Martian isn't hard sci-fi just because of that one thing. And I think some of the, it seems to me like some of the stuff that goes on with the disease, is, I think a lot of people say that makes it not hard sci-fi, but I don't agree with that. But anyway, that it really doesn't really matter. But yeah, I forgot what my point was, but yeah, there it is. I lost my train of thought.
I wanted to go back to the fact that you mentioned that both of these people are connected to George R. R. Martin, because
right.
In reading this first half, I really realized that it was like, I was like, this was always going to be a show, right? Like this was always going to be, it just feels like a TV show. I think it's really clever to have like this sort of detective story going on to kind of propel the story forward, while also having this sort of like introductory to this world sci-fi adventure kind of like classic story, like I was talking about, with like sort of like a distress beacon and checking it out and things spiraling from there, and then how the two meet. But with the connection to George R. R. Martin, it does feel like kind of like maybe not quite as political in terms of like people vying for certain things, but there's some of that there, but like the sort of setup with the world building, like you were talking about, like this Fred Johnson character reminds me of, and like his sort of like Butcher of Anderson Station story that we got like touchings of, kind of reminds me of like a Robert's Rebellion type thing. It's like history that's been built into the world that I'm sure we'll find out more about here and there.
Yeah. I can see that. I don't want to get. I mean, I am a Martin fan, as we have covered in previous episodes, but I don't want to give him too much credit. He's not the person. He didn't like invent these kind of storylines. He just does them well. But you're right. I mean, I'm sure that someone says, oh, it's like Game of Thrones in space. I'm sure that has been said about The Expanse. Which, by the way, I don't know if we've said that yet. This book is the basis for The Expanse, and this series is the Expanse series. In case you clicked on this episode and you had no idea what Leviathan Wakes is, that's book 1 of the Expanse series. Which, by the way, there are currently 8 novels out, and there is a 9th one planned, as far as I know, which is supposed to be the final one. They have also released a series of novellas and short fiction between each novel's release. So there's quite a bit of material, and you can just imagine, like, think about how much world building we've already seen in half of one book. And you extrapolate that out over 8 or 9 books, like, I can see why people are so into this. Like, this is, like, if you really, when you read all that stuff and you are just so immersed in this world that they've built, I can see it's, being just this incredible thing. And honestly, I'm kind of excited because I think I'm going to get into it. I'm really enjoying this.
I mean, I'm excited because we've been waiting to watch the TV show for years now.
Yeah.
Like, I haven't been watching it because of the fact that we were going to cover this. So this is a good reason to jump into it. And I know that it's massive. Like, I know that the audience for the show is huge. And I'm sure that that's led to people going back and reading the book. And the book readers, I'm sure, are watching the show. I think I just saw a new trailer for season 4, which I didn't watch just because,
I saw that it came out, but didn't watch it. Agreed. Same thing, because I'm too far behind. I don't know. I wouldn't know what was going on. It'd probably be spoilers, so I didn't watch it. But yeah, I mean, we'll get into the show next week. We're gonna watch the first 5 episodes and talk about them, and talk about what's going on with the show, because I know it's had quite a history, which we'll have to get into.
Yeah, and you talking about the 8 books makes me wonder, like, how closely does the show stick to those 8 books? Like, that's a lot of material to adapt.
Right.
I wonder how closely, because like I feel like it's a butterfly effect, right? If you start to change things early on, what do the kind of like with Game of Thrones? How does the ending look?
That's a good segue, because that leads me into talking about how we decided to do our coverage for this, which is going to be kind of an experiment for us. I don't think we've ever quite done it like this. The most similar thing I can think of was like Good Omens. But even that, we didn't split up the way we're going to split this up. So what we decided to do is we found out from my wife, who has read the entire book. She told me that this book actually goes into season 2, as far as like the material in the book goes up to something like episode 5 of season 2. And so we were like, well, there's not a real good correlation there where we can't like swap off between book and show and have it be following the same plot. So what we did is we read the first half of this novel, and then next week we're going to cover the first 5 episodes of the show. The following week we'll do the next 5 episodes of the show, which will round out season 1, and then we'll come back and finish out the book, which should take us like the furthest in the story, because it goes past season 1, and I think that'll be a good place to round out this coverage. So we're going to try and do it in 4 episodes. We're going to be covering a ton of material basically for every one. So it's going to be, we're not going to maybe get as nitty gritty as we've been able to get with previous projects. And that's just by the sheer volume of things we're going to be trying to cover here. But yeah, I think it's going to be fun. It's kind of an experiment. So we'll definitely be excited to hear what you guys think of this. If you could write in and let us know, or comment on one of our social media posts or whatever, let us know what you think of this coverage. And if you like the way we tackled this, because TV is always difficult for us, and we're always trying to figure out new ways to cover it, ways that make sense for our show. So this is just something we're trying out, and hopefully it works. So you talked about one thing earlier, that was the sort of noir, hard-boiled detective storyline that we get from Miller. And while I liked that, and I think it was purposely done to be a recognizable hook. It's supposed to be something easy that you understand. Okay, he's a cop and he's investigating a mystery, and it's in this, he's on a station and things are weird, but we're gonna like follow him into the seedier parts of society. We're gonna see what life is like on Ceres, and we're gonna learn about the world. And that all works. But it really, when this book started to hook me, was when we got into the more time we spent with Holden and his crew. And it started to take on what I would call like a space western feel, and we started to get the sense of almost like a Firefly or a Cowboy Bebop, or any number of space westerns we've had, and that's the stuff that I really gravitated towards. And so once we started getting that feel, and we started getting the crew dynamics and all that stuff, which I don't know, we haven't really talked about the summary yet, but I'm jumping around a little bit, but that stuff really hooked me. And the combination of both of those recognizable elements, I think, does make for a story that is a good entry point for people who might otherwise really struggle to read a really science-heavy space opera like this, right? Which it could otherwise be off-putting to some readers.
Yeah, it's to start out. There's a lot of moving parts. Like they're setting up like the Belt, the Mars kind of Republic Federation type thing.
Yeah.
They're setting up the Earth one. They're setting up like all of this stuff's being set up. All these characters are being set up. And I think you're right. I think that like kind of noir detective story is there to serve as like propulsion for the first bit of the story, for you to be like, all right, you're working your way through these chapters with all the space stuff that's going on, and you're, it's like you're trying to figure the Holden and his crew and all that stuff that goes on out, but at the same time, like this mystery is being pushed forward, and like it's like it's more grounded, and you can really like understand it. But as time goes on, I think I was also drawn more to the Holden story, and then like with the merging of the two later, nearing the end of this first half, I obviously felt like that was what was going to happen, but it was nice to see it start to happen. And it's interesting that, because like we're head hopping between Holden and Miller, and to see them come together and be in the same spot, but then also be head hopping between the two while they're basically doing the same thing.
And by head hopping, you just mean that we're alternating POVs with them.
Right.
Yeah, no, and I agree with that. It was cool to see them merge together, or not merge, to see the storylines merge together. And I think it was much needed, because I was starting to tire a little bit of Miller. I think he is modeled after another character in some sense that we've covered on this podcast. Do you know who I'm going to say?
Deckard?
Rick Deckard. Yeah. I think you have this history of sort of, I mean, you can't have like a noir style detective in a sci-fi, story without having some sort of connection, right? And in some sense, like I like that, but it felt like they didn't do enough with him to really separate him from a lot of the other kind of archetypal hard-boiled detectives we've seen in these sort of roles. He's okay. I do like a character who's sort of so like just bitter and like numb to it all, and like he has
this weird fascination too, right? Like his case, like in sort of a noir fashion, he's so fixated,
Becomes obsessed,
and it's like
yeah.
for like kind of weird reasons. It seems like he's like, is he in love with her? Is this like some weird obsession he has? She, because he talks about how she represents like what his life could have been or whatever, and like even if the
Right.
two had met, it probably wouldn't have worked.
Well, he starts like hallucinating visions of her, and like he talks to
Yeah.
her and stuff. Julie, you're talking about, yeah.
Right.
And that's kind of interesting, and you know, a lot of the elements you're saying are sort of fit very, very well with that archetypal character. I guess I just wanted a little more outside of that archetype, like a little bit
Right.
more to set him apart from the other ones we've seen. Not to say that there's nothing, you know what I mean? Like, I don't get me wrong. I just thought like his character needed a little bit more, and maybe he develops it over time. So I'll be interested to track that. But early on, it was like at first I really liked him, and then I started to get cold on him. And it was a good thing that at the same time I was getting really into the Holden stuff, because that really kept me engaged and interested in the story.
I mean, I think I agree with that. I think that's kind of how it was for me. And once the two came together, like I talked about, I feel like Miller immediately became more, like you said, like it was this like the investigation, and he's talking to people, and he's going through documents and like all this stuff, and it just like he's kind of spinning his wheels, and then like he finally gets fired and like joins up, like goes to find where they're at, and like then he kind of clicks in with their story, and I think it immediately becomes more interesting again.
Well, and I think part of it is also that the stuff that's going on with Holden feels so big and like solar system altering. You know, they're starting wars over this, and the stuff with Miller feels very small scale, and like, you know that it's probably going to link up. But sometimes it was kind of a letdown to come off of something that was so big and exciting to come back to Miller, who's like talking to some guy and trying to find out some information, and you know what I mean? Like, it would be kind of, it would be the differences there would be kind of stark sometimes, but let's move on from that, because I don't think it's a problem. One of the things I really loved, and I've already mentioned this, but just to harp on it some more, is the world building going on, because I am a junkie for really clever world building, and the more I got into this, the more I started to believe that like this is what's going to happen one day. Like, it's such a believable premise for humanity's expansion into the solar system, and how it could happen, and then like then politically what could evolve from that is so cool and interesting, and I love the idea of these belters who feel like they're kind of put upon by both the Martians and the Earthers, and how they feel like they're sort of the blue collar, like they're getting taxed by everybody, and they're sort of oppressed, and then they feel like their needs aren't being seen to, so they're starting to form their own like rebellion, and they have the OPA, which is this labeled a terrorist organization. And honestly, I kind of felt like they were a little bit of an American story, right? Like breaking away from the British Empire and feeling like you shouldn't be taxed from someone who's so far away and doesn't have your best interests in mind. And you know, that's maybe an oversimplification of what's going on here, but in some ways, like my latent American spirit, I guess, was caught up in it, and I felt like I was identifying with the Belters really strongly.
Yeah, I didn't think you'd be talking about your latent American spirit in this episode.
Neither did I until it came out, honestly.
Yeah, I was really into the world building as well, like this sort of factionization of people. Like, even if we get off world, we're gonna create factions, we're gonna create tribes, see people as different.
Well, and the racism that comes up from people from different areas because you look different because of the way gravity affects you, which is a really cool detail. And which I know they're not the first to do, but it's the way all this kind of is unified.
Definitely. And I also really like the way that like I think it's like the Belters and the Martians are kind of going at it. Like, I think the Belters are stealing from the Martians or something like that, and then the Americans are trying to stay, or the Earthlings are trying to stay out of it, because I think it's like the Earthlings and the Martians are like
Earthers
against each other.
Is what they call them in this.
The Earthers and the Martians are kind of against each other, and then the Belters are stealing from the Martians. And then, like, in terms of like that stuff, I don't think that the Earthers really want to be involved in it or something
Well,
like that.
there's I guess there was like piracy going on in the belt. It sounds like, because there's a lot of this. There's this like trade of gases and water and different minerals.
Yeah, the outer planets have like better resources, I think, so they try to bring them in towards Mars and Earth, but it has to come through the belt in order to get there.
Well, and there is a lot of precious materials out in the belt, so it kind of makes sense that they would eventually start mining them. And I just also love, like, that's like the macro, but then like the micro level of like the life on these stations and what it's like, and how they get their food, to what the lighting is like. I mean, I have to mention that, like, I'm writing a novel that is a underwater sci-fi novel that has like station life and stuff like that, and I couldn't help but be inspired and love all these details, because it was like, I don't know, like, I've been doing this sort of stuff in my work, and it just showed me like even more things to think about, and it's a useful book for me to be reading right now. Just because it's, anytime you can read something that's sort of in a similar genre to what you write. And that's the other thing, the tone and the style of this book, that it's adult, that it's dark, that it's got some violence to it, but it's also got humor, it's also got likable characters, and it's also diverse, and all these things you can, this is the hallmarks of the kind of fiction I like to write. And I would say probably similar, because I've heard people say that I should comp the Expanse or Leviathan Wake specifically for my book when I try and query it, and I can see what they're saying, because I think it is sort of a kind there. So that's very self-indulgent, so we don't have to linger on that very much. But it is a reaction I had while reading this, and I have to talk about it at least a little bit.
Yeah, that's cool, man. It's cool to hear.
So anyway, the world building I was geeking out about, but now we can move on. What about you, man? Like, what's really standing out about this story for you, that you think makes this the sort of thing that has this long running, now entering its 4th season show based off of it, that people are so passionate about? Like, what is setting this apart?
So to me, the reason it felt so much like it needed to be adapted into a show is that, like, I could feel the episodes ending. Do you know what I mean? Like, each like kind of situation that they get into, the conflict is resolved, and then like something else comes around the corner. It felt very episodic to me. Like, it felt like I was like reading a TV show script.
Yeah, it's compelling stuff. I'm just thinking, like, we have the personal stakes with someone like Holden, who loses someone that he seems like maybe he wasn't fully in love with, but he really had feelings for and was having a somewhat of a relationship with, when the Cant is destroyed, and the personal stakes for all of them, and losing their friends and all of that. But then you also get these stakes that are so huge because a war breaks out.
Or is breaking out.
It is in the process of breaking out, and it seems like it's full steam ahead at this point. So I don't know. I love how they're able to juggle both of those things. Like, whenever you can have personal stakes and these like really big stakes at the same time, that's a good way to just hook a reader in and feel like there's a lot going on here.
Yeah, and I mean, to make another comparison, which maybe is a little more thin than the other ones that I made. If you were going to compare this to Game of Thrones again, the sort of like black ooze that they're finding it would be like your White Walkers. That's like a threat looming, and like, what is that? What's going on there?
We should talk more about that. We only really get a bit of that at the start, which is actually a prologue from Julie's point of view, who ends up being sort of the missing person that Miller is investigating. And we see her interact with a talking head at the end of the prologue, and there's like this growth on the generator, or not the generator, the engine and room and stuff, and like, it's something crazy's going on. There's a goo, there's some sort of infection, it seems like, and then there's something maybe even almost magical happening. Unclear. Maybe it does have a scientific explanation, I don't know, but I think there's a talking head, like decapitated head. So something crazy and dark, like it's almost like a horror movie start too, like a horror in space kind of thing, which I also love, like space horror. So all these things are lining up perfectly with my tastes, and I can see why this was recommended to me. And the other thing is like the level. I guess maybe we should talk a little bit about background. Have you seen any of the show coming into this?
I think I saw like the first episode and then stopped. So not really.
I saw the first, I think 2 or 3. I'm not really sure. It's been years, a few years now. I'm sure I'll remember as I go to watch them. And I don't want to get into the show much here because we're focusing on the book, but I was immediately taken with just how much more detail I was getting, and how much more time I was spending with these characters throughout each of these moments, which I felt like a lot of this happened very fast in the show. So in some sense, like I just immediately gravitate towards this book as being the sort of way I like to experience a story like this. Now, I'll be curious to see if that changes over time with the show and if I start to gravitate more towards the show. But this is one where my very initial gut feeling is just that I, off the jump, really am preferring the book to what I had seen in the show. Now, the show was bad, and we'll get into it. Maybe I'll change my mind after I see more of it. But just that this felt like a really pure experience for me for the story.
Yeah. I mean, that tends to be the case, and like that's why it's a good thing this wasn't adapted into a movie, right? Because it's like however short you feel like it was in the show, it would have been 10 times shorter in a movie. So it's just ridiculous. Like kind of the economy of like how much time you're gonna invest in the character to like endear them to the audience. And so like that's interesting because it's a pretty long show at this point. So I'm sure that by the end, season 4 is about to come out, people are really invested in these characters like you would be in a book.
But
so yeah,
if they have 9 fucking books at the end of this, how many seasons of television are they going to do? Because that's a lot of material, man. Game of Thrones doesn't even have that many books. And now these books, granted, are a little shorter than your average Game of Thrones novel, but not by much.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, we can get into that more as we go on, but I think I'm going to read some summary and we can react to specifics in the story. Are you ready for that?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. The ice-hauling ship Canterbury is en route to the Ceres station when it encounters a distress signal. 5 members of the Cant's crew are dispatched in a shuttle to investigate. Executive Officer James Holden, Chief Engineer Naomi Nagata, Pilot Alex Kamal, Engineer Amos Burton, and Medic Shed Garvey. They discover an abandoned transport vessel called the Scapulae. They find no trace of the ship's crew, but they do discover the beacon transmitting the distress signal. Suspecting that the ship may be a trap set by pirates, they take the beacon and begin to return to the Cant. Before they can make it, an unknown stealth warship arrives and without warning destroys the Cant with a nuclear weapon. Holden sends an angry message to the attacking ship, but it ignores him and departs. Based on the highly advanced technology of the warship and the discovery that the beacon from the Scapulae is of Martian origin, the survivors suspect Mars of being behind the attack. In response, the shuttle is ordered to rendezvous with the MCRN, which is the Martian Federation thing, battleship the Donager, the flagship of Mars' Jupiter fleet. En route, they receive a message from Fred Johnson, chief of Tycho Station, an engineering outpost and construction platform, offering his support. As the shuttle makes its way to the rendezvous, they are pursued by a group of unknown ships. Meanwhile, on Ceres Station, Belter Detective Josephus, aka Joe, Miller of Star Helix Security, the Earth-based private security firm responsible for policing the station, is contracted to locate Julie Mao, the daughter of wealthy magnate Jules Pierre Mao, and send her back to her family on Luna against her will. When Holden's message reaches Ceres, riots erupt, which leads Miller to discover that the station's riot gear is missing. All right, so let's stop there because that sets up both of these plot lines in plenty of detail, but yeah, that sets us up.
Just to jump to like the beginning with the sort of situation, the shuttle's kind of on its way back to the main Canterbury, and there's this hopeless thing with space where it's like no matter what, it's going to take a long time for things to happen. So like their trajectory is like an hour to get back to the main ship, and then like they slowly have to see these like stealth ships like appear and start attacking, and they're hearing people over the comms, and they're basically just saying, like, I believe the person they're communicating with is like very calm, and it's just like, their impact in 30 seconds, and they're counting down impact time, and there's no way that the shuttle will make it in time, and just that idea of like being helpless, I felt was like really, I don't know, that was a pretty engaging scene.
Absolutely, it was gripping, and I love that they didn't know they're torpedoes of some kind. I think they're described as, but they don't know that they're nukes. So I think the thought was they were going to take damage, but they didn't think the entire ship was going to get almost vaporized. Which is
and they said that too. The characters were like, "Yeah, once you get hit, just like do whatever you can to survive, and then we'll get you out of there," kind of thing.
Yeah. So then the drop in the stomach of like, oh my God, they're just gone. Like it was nukes. And he is Holden is literally on the comms with, I think Ade was her name, the woman he had the relationship with, and he essentially hears her die, hears her final moments. And so he's filled with sort of a righteous anger when he sends out this message. And I love that it sort of has this unintended consequence, because he says factually that some of the stuff showed Mars manufacturing on it. Yet that just including that alone is setting off this domino effect as all these other stations are hearing about it, and they leap to the conclusion that Mars just attacked. Whereas that's actually not known, and he even says that's not what I said, but everyone leaps to that conclusion, right?
Right. And that's the main thing, is like when they got to the scopuli, it was like there was nobody on board, the airlocks were all broken, all that kind of stuff, and it wasn't the distress signal wasn't coming from the distress beacon of the actual scopuli. It was like an additional beacon that was put in there and attached to the battery, so it was like very clear that like it was like a diversion or like some sort of setting up. Somebody was being set up. Yeah. Or maybe not set up.
Yeah, because I mean, and we don't know at this point, but my I feel like someone wanted to start a war is the only thing I can read from this. Like, someone wanted to start a war between Mars and Earth and the belts, specifically the belts, I think.
I wanted to ask you, do you think we have enough details to like, although like I don't know who it is, do you think we have enough details to kind of say like, do you think that the person or faction or whatever it is that's behind it, do you think it's been introduced yet, or do you think it's something we'll see in the second half?
I bet there's stuff in there. I just feel like when you're dealing with sort of mystery, there's got to be things. So I suspect we probably do have some information. We just don't know what's important and what's not, and what the key is. I think Earth has been noticeably absent from what we've gotten so far. And I feel like at some point we're going to get some more Earther interactions and stuff like that. It does seem to me like Mars is not behind it. I think they're getting kind of roped into this. Is it another faction that either hasn't been introduced yet, or we haven't realized is introduced? Maybe. Yeah. I don't know.
This sort of stealth ship situation reminds me of a Star Trek episode a little bit. Like
I was getting some Star Trek vibes for some of this. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to have like space battles and not have any of that, though. You know.
Yeah, just sort of like the main ship is being attacked by stealth things that jumped out of nowhere, and they're attacking us, and they were there all along.
Was that a Klingon bird of prey or whatever? I don't know. I'm not a Trekkie, so I'm sure that's gonna be obvious as I butcher any reference I try and make. Are you Trekkie? I don't know this about you, James.
No,
you seem like you're more into Star Wars.
Yeah, I'm more of a Star Wars person, but I like Star Trek. I feel like at some point I will, I think that'll be a gap that I fill in eventually, just like kind of really immerse myself in all Star Trek.
Right. Just random, just because we mentioned it. I grew up watching Next Generation. So I did watch a ton of that. I know a little bit of the original, and then I watched some Deep Space Nine and some Voyager here and there, but I never really followed it like religiously, and I never got really steeped in the lore because I never read any of the novels or anything. So, just a little bit. I am a fan. I'm just not like a full blown Trekkie, who's got it all down.
Yeah. I know. I prefer like Next Generation was my entry point as well. Like that's what I watched. I can't say I watched all of it.
I mean, the tone is obviously very different in the story, though, right? Because this is a world where there's racism, where it's highly capitalist. Clearly, is still very true. Whereas Star Trek is a lot more utopian. A lot of the drama comes from outside of the Federation, right, where there's a lot of peace, and instead it's like aliens and stuff. Whereas this is mostly humans on humans. They've just gone to different parts of the solar system, but so in that sense, it's kind of gritty, and it's sort of and it reminds me more of like a cyberpunk, right? I was getting strong, especially when they go to Eros later. I was getting very strong Blade Runner vibes. So I think they're leaning into it.
Were you getting Altered Carbon as well? Like obviously that's another comparison point, but like I was just wondering like if any of this stuff struck you as like more Altered Carbon than Blade Runner.
Well, I mean,
because I feel like the thing about Blade Runner is that it's like very specifically like cyberpunk, like is slightly different than what we're getting here. But there is a detective story in a sci-fi world.
So that's why I specifically said the Eros stuff, because there's a moment where he's walking through the like Vice sections of that part, and he Miller stops to eat noodles, and he has a conversation with someone else, and I was specifically thinking of a scene in Blade Runner when that happens. So I don't, that direct moment just evoked that to me, you know.
That could have been a reference too. I feel like if I was going to write a story with sci-fi detective story, like you're going to put a noodle scene in just for fun.
Right, yeah. So I think that definitely might have been a reference. If so, I caught it. Do you want to say anything about meeting Joe Miller here and his sort of introduction and learning about the initial parts of this mystery here? We got some riots erupting on the station, which is fun. Yeah. By fun, I mean not fun.
With this story, I immediately felt like it was going to be like, I obviously, like, right away we know this is a detective story and it's going to play out in that kind of way. But I was wondering like how far it would lean into like that sort of like noir detective story, underbelly of society, like red herring filled, like femme fatale, like all that kind of stuff. But you know, I don't think we've got all of that. But it is cool to see that it is this. I don't know. I feel like any detective story, it's hard to pull it away from it being like influenced by like noir and that sort of like early detective story.
Yeah, I think very clearly that's what's going on here. And I am glad that it doesn't last throughout the entire book, at least early on. I like that we get Miller outside of Ceres. He goes to Eros, and he's starting to do some different sort of things and interact with different sorts of characters outside of that familiar ground. And I think that's good for the character. I think displacing him from that is good. It did feel to me like if I were to critique any of the parts of the novels for dragging a little, it was some of this investigation stuff. Where he was like continuing to deal with his inner agency politics and dealing with his superiors, and like just some of that maybe dragged a hair, especially by comparison of all the fireworks that were going on in the other storyline, which we've already mentioned.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about Fred Johnson, this character that we're introduced to with like his lore and
Frederick Johnson. Yeah,
because he was like a hero. Well, maybe it was like he wasn't a hero and then he was a hero, right? Something like that.
So he was a hero to Earth because he quelled this like rebellion thing and like he like was the butcher of a station.
Oh right, and he
was like a villain
for
all the Belters. But then he ended up
switching,
like leaving, and he switched his allegiances, and he instead ended up negotiating some stuff. I can't remember the exact details. He negotiated some peace and some like a deal, I think, that was happening, and he kind of became a hero again. So he's got this reputation as being
a turncoat,
not only a really brilliant military mind, but yeah, also being someone who turned on Earth and is now being championed by the Belters. So I think they even say like he is the Robin Hood figure for them now, right? Like he's beloved by a lot of the Belters. So pretty cool. I'm hoping we're going to get more of him, which I assume we will.
Yeah. I mean, we already have, like, they've met up with him here in a little bit.
Well, speaking of that, maybe we should progress a little in the plot here so we can talk about that directly. So, aboard the Donager, which is the Martian flagship thing, I did not think this thing was going down so fast, but let me get through this here and we can react to it. Aboard the Donager, the ship's captain denies any knowledge of the MCRN's involvement in the attack on the Canterbury, and instead suspects that one or more of the survivors from the shuttle may have bombed the camp as an act of OPA terrorism. The unknown ships that were pursuing the shuttle ignore warnings to change course and are fired on by the Donager. To the surprise of the Martian crew, the ships return fire. Despite the fact that the Donager is one of the most advanced and deadly warships in the solar system, it is steadily overwhelmed by the mysterious enemy ships and eventually boarded. During the battle, a railgun round penetrates the hull, decapitating Garvey. A team of the Donager's marine contingent arrives to evacuate the Cant's remaining crew. Although all of the Martian Marines are killed in the process, the 4 surviving Cant crew members are able to escape aboard the light frigate Tachi, just before the Donager is scuttled. So let's react to this. I think this is a big moment. It was very cool. It was very exciting. So I think let's just focus in on that and react to it. What did you think of this?
So you were talking about how you didn't think that the Donager was going to go down that quickly, and like this ship is like top of the line, best they have in the fleet, this kind of thing, which makes me think that like this could be some sort of aliens. You know what I mean? I don't think that it is, because I think the mystery of like human on human violence in this story is going to be more interesting. But the idea that they have like these stealth ships that tore apart their best, like one of their best ships, it's very Star Trek. Like that feels kind of Star Trek to me. Like this sort of like like they can't outmaneuver them. They don't have the weapons to beat them, and they're kind of like backed into a corner by advanced technology, and they have to outsmart them.
So this is I don't know how much it really informs this, but it's kind of a hint I got from doing research. And it may completely lead us down the wrong path, but to support that theory, when they were originally, our authors were originally coming up with the MMORPG, they had the concept of there being the Belters, the Martians, and the Earthers, and then a fourth faction that was aliens that was encroaching upon them and sort of like an outside antagonist. So if there's any holdover of that, it could potentially be true, but I don't know if that's what they decided to go with or not. Sorry, you were saying.
Yeah, it could be a Watchmen situation where it's like, all these humans have to come together because they're under attack by aliens. Like they realize they're more similar than they are different, and they come together to fight against this common enemy or something.
And by aliens, you mean giant psychic squids.
Right.
Brought by Ozymandias.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be. Probably not that specific thing, but yeah, something similar could be.
I mean, ultimately, I don't think that it's going to be the alien stuff, just because I think that like the drama of like human on human is a little more. I don't want to say it's more interesting, but it's more. It doesn't seem like it's like as out of left field.
Yeah.
We're talking about Watchmen, and like I feel like because I haven't been able to say it on the podcast yet, I just want everybody to know that like if you're not watching Watchmen on HBO, please watch it. Especially if you like if you like the comic book. I'm in love with that show. So
co-signed. We'll have to talk about that some more on a bonus episode or something. But one of the things I wanted to mention about this sequence is how it is the first real like high flying, gunfire. We're getting very Space Marine feels, right? Like we have, it was exciting. There was explosions going off. We had a guy get decapitated by a railgun, which, I felt horrible about. Like he was this medic who Holden had just had a moment with like earlier, right. And then he just gets his head blown off. And
I was like, wow, that was like a genuine moment. This guy's going to be an important character. And then it was like, nope, it was just to set up his death.
Yeah, gotcha. And that's well done. That's well executed. And I don't know. I just enjoyed all this. There was a moment where someone died, but they were still like had their magnet boots attached, so they were just like flopping in the air, which I thought was fun. There's a lot of cool details in here. People getting exploded, and I loved that one of the Marines was like crushed and severely wounded, and then he wanted them to go to this like high speed thing where they go to like 5Gs or something, and later they say like he must have known he was going to die when you did that, yet he wanted you to do it anyway because he knew that was the only way to escape. So they say they're going to like pass on his information and stuff so that he gets a proper recognition, which I thought was cool. So there's just a lot of great details here, and it is kind of neat that it's and maybe overly neat in that it is just our members of the crew that arrived as prisoners who escape on this ship at the end with no one else. But I did like that the Marine was there. He just died, and I felt like they earned it ultimately.
Yeah, I also want to talk about this drug that the pilots use to kind of deal with the gravity that they're going through when they're flying through space at crazy speeds. It allows the characters to just like grunt through whatever gravity is coming their way and just like muscle through it. And I don't know, I found it to be really interesting.
Yeah, it gives them like this hyper focus. Cool stuff. All these little details, right, that they're pouring in here that make sense and enrich the world and just makes it more believable. All right, so still unsure of who is trying to kill them, the crew of the Canterbury decide to go to Tycho Station. There, the Cant survivors share what they've seen with Fred Johnson, who reveals that he is an influential member of the OPA. They receive new transponder codes from the Chachi from Fred, disguise the ship as a gas hauler, and rename it the Rocinante, or Rossi. Fred sends the Rossi to Aero Station to find an OPA operative named Lionel Polanski. Meanwhile, on Ceres, Miller has noticed an exodus of criminals from the station. He also discovers that Julie Mal's father had warned her of an attack in the Belt just 2 weeks before the destruction of the Cant. He is then confronted by Anderson Dawes, leader of the Ceres chapter of the OPA, who tells him that Julie Mao had joined the OPA and had disappeared while performing an important mission for them aboard the Scopuli. Dawes cautions Miller not to investigate the matter any further. Miller presents this information to his boss, Captain Shadid, but she also instructs him to drop the case. Miller, however, finds himself obsessing over Julie. When he persists, he is fired by Shadid, who is revealed to be in collusion with Dawes. However, Miller is still able to access docking logs for all the ports in the belt, which he has been granted access to before his termination. Realizing that the Scopuli was the same ship mentioned in Holden's broadcast, he is able to discern that the Rocinante is the former Tachi from its registry information, and he departs for Eros. Okay, so let's talk about this, because I think this is a part of the story that actually, it seems kind of like a transition, but it actually really hooked me, because this is when we get to see the crew really start to bond, and I think Naomi and Holden's relationship starts to evolve. We're starting to see some more color and some more differentiation in personalities of Alex and Amos. And that made me start to really identify with these characters, connect with their struggles. And I like the idea of them having to find a new mission and decide they want to get back to work. And then in the way that Holden negotiates with Fred to get the assignment of going to Eros, I thought showed a lot, like a new layer to Holden that we hadn't seen so far, and really cemented him as like a captain I could really get behind. Like, I want this guy to be my captain, you know? I'm in.
That's very like Firefly or like Han Solo, right? Like, that's like the kind of like, well, we got to find work and like figure out like how to keep going, but we're wanted by some people, and you know, that kind of thing.
Right. When this is where it's getting very space western, right? Yeah. And I love the disguise of they have a warship that they've disguised to look like a gas hauler, and that just seems really cool and like on the surface. Right. And yeah, I don't know. I loved all of this, and it made me really, really invested in their storyline. This
is kind of where Miller's whole like investigation comes to a head. Also, we learn that Julie's parents told her, warned her of an impending attack, and so it's like, how are they able to get their hands on that information? Like, that means that clearly it was premeditated, it wasn't something random,
right? Which links the moon potentially, which is referred to as Luna, which we don't know much about what their sort of political standing is. I assumed they were sort of allied with Earth, but maybe they're their own separate thing. I don't know.
Yeah, and it's like, are they like high status or something? Like, are they higher status than just your average Earther? Or is it like, because that almost makes me think of like, oh, they're like, it's because they're rich that they had this information, but that's just me speculating.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll be curious to learn more about that. I think if I were to suspect anything, it's that we are going to learn more about Luna, what's going on there because of the tie to the Mao family and all that, right? Like, we're probably going to learn more about that, I would assume.
And then this is where he detects and figures out that the ship is the older ship, the Tachi, and follows it.
So this is also where we see Miller get fired, which I thought was kind of a surprise twist. You know, he's no longer a cop officially, and he sets off on his own to investigate this thing with barely any money to his name, and it seems like he has very few friends. And this was a nice change up for this story, and it started to kind of reinvest me in this character too. So this was I thought like actually a really important moment for the book, where it really started to pull me back in across all storylines.
Yeah, it was very like hand in your gun and badge situation, and like he's still so invested in this case that he can't give it up situation.
Right. So still very firmly in the archetype.
But it fits. It definitely fits.
Yeah. And I liked his detective work, right? Like, it was clever, the way he was able to narrow it down and discern from the logs and all that stuff. And I thought that was a cool part.
Yeah, he's lucky that he got that in under the wire before he got fired. He like requested the info.
Yeah. Yeah, it just barely worked out. All right, so let's get into the final bit of summary here for this first half that we read. On Eros, Miller finds the crew of the Rossi at a hotel where Lionel Polanski was listed as a guest. In Polanski's room, they find the body of Julie Mao covered in a strange organic growth. On her phone, Miller finds logs detailing the progression of her affliction, which seem to be fueled by exposure to energy and radiation, and the coordinates of an asteroid where one of the ships that attacked the Kent is supposedly docked. Before they can leave, or they think might be docked. Before they can leave the station, a radiation alert is declared, and station security begins herding people into radiation shelters. Miller recognizes that some of the security officers are criminals from Ceres who are wearing the missing Star Helix riot gear. He and Holden stay behind to investigate while the rest of the crew is sent back to the Rossi. They discover that the people in the shelters have been doused with an unknown substance and exposed to extremely high levels of radiation. As they make their way to the docks, they realize that the people in the shelters were infected with the same organism as Julie, and the radiation was used to feed its rapid growth. And that is where we stopped. Right in the middle of a bunch of cool shit happening, crazy shit happening. Maybe not the best place to stop, but we literally opened up the book halfway and figured out what chapter that fell on, and that's where this fell.
Couple of things. Did you mention when Holden and crew show up, they get basically ambushed?
That's not in the summary, okay. But yeah, that does happen.
Okay, so yeah, that happens, and that's when Miller comes and saves the day, because he had been tailing them, because he realized that they were from that ship, so he'd been following them. Cool moment. I thought that was like another moment where like just the meeting of the minds and the meeting of this moment we'd been building to for half a book so far. It was cool to see the characters together.
I agree. We see Miller holds his own, potentially kind of saves them in this gunfight. He knows a lot more about what's going on in some ways than Holden does, so he really holds his own in the kind of conversations he's having.
Yeah, and Holden and company don't make it out of this situation without Miller, because Miller realizes, because he'd seen the criminals before, the criminals who were like putting people into the areas, like they probably just would have gone into a radiation shelter also and been killed, which that was pretty horrific, that they were like, they're basically just killing everyone on the station. And I can't tell, at first it seemed like it was in order to stop the spreading, like there was just some sort of like utilitarian, like kill all these people so that it doesn't spread throughout the universe. But then they were using the same thing that killed Julie to kill these people. So it's like, it seems like they're not worried about spreading it.
It seems like a spread. No, it seems like spreading it is the point. I don't know. Or at least making it seem like this disease has really run rampant and is, I don't know. To me, this feels like another step in a series of steps to ignite conflict in the solar system. Right. Yeah. And because I can see that like people are going to get blamed. It's going to look like something slightly different than what actually happened is what actually happened. And I don't know if someone's going to come out and take credit for it or what's going to happen, but this feels to me like political maneuvers and putting certain factions against each other. And somebody employed these criminals to do the things they're doing, and to use this riot gear. And honestly, it was hard to put the book down at this moment because it was very exciting and I wanted to know what happened next.
We should definitely talk about finding Julie's body and how they go through her diary or
brutal description of what has happened to her body. Very body horror, very disgusting. This is some gross shit. I was actually thinking of the scene from Annihilation, the film.
Yeah.
Do you remember that when they find that body that's like grown into the wall and stuff? Like I kind of imagine that because she had all this growth coming out of her in like tubes and pipes and I don't even know. It was very gross, and bones and.
I don't think it fits exactly, but
no, it doesn't. Not exactly.
No. Well, I was gonna say something different. I think yours is pretty on point, but I kept thinking of Dead Space. Like a lot of this like station stuff made me think of like the horror element of Dead Space and being on a station and like I don't know if we'll see creatures fully,
they're gonna get scythes that come out and chop people.
Yeah, right.
We haven't seen any creatures yet, but it does feel like that could be where this is going. I don't know. We haven't seen that yet, but they keep hinting at like they were looking at her and it seemed like she might be moving, but then she wasn't, and I don't know. I don't know if we're gonna get that or not, but it seems like it could be a possibility.
Yeah. So this really affects Miller too. Like he kind of it breaks him a little bit for a second, right?
Yeah. Oh, and yeah, you mentioned the logs. I actually really like both times when he was reading her emails and the stuff here. It felt like a really cleverly done way to give a lot of character to this person that we really only saw in the prologue, and make you feel like you kind of get her as a person and her relationship with her family and her parents And then we feel for her as she's starting to, as we read these logs, and she's figuring out she's been infected, and she has at one point where she sleeps for like 3 weeks or something crazy.
Yeah, and she's like, I didn't even get up to pee. Like, that was crazy.
Yeah, some wild stuff's happening there, and then I also love the moment where they kind of look at each other and they're like, "Were we infected? I don't know."
I think Julie had figured out that it wasn't airborne, right? It's
right.
Like,
they think, yeah. And so I don't think they are, but I just like that because like when you found out that something was a disease that killed her that she didn't know she was infected with, and then she ended up being infected with. That would be where mine would immediately go too, right? Like, oh shit, did I touch something? Did I get infected? Right. It's hard to know. So that was all great. And then, the moment where they realize that these guys in the riot gear aren't right, and they avoid certain death by avoiding the trap of going to the radiation centers that they almost go to. It's exciting stuff.
How about the fact that in the logs, I think she says something about how it's attracted to the radiation and the energy and that kind of thing. Like, that's a big deal. Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe that's what it needs to activate it. Like you feed it just a ton of radiation or something. Because
I would assume the engines and stuff, from what we're understanding, are giving off radiation and that kind of thing in general. And there's tons of radiation in space, just in general. So it seems like it could get out of hand and be catastrophic pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely could be. But yeah, man, I mean, that's the end of what we've come to here. Like, we're very much in the middle of the story here. And now we're not even going to progress because we're going to go and we're going to watch the show. But it'll preserve some of the mystery a little bit. I'm going to be really curious to see 5 episodes in how much it might line up and how much it might go past, what they do with these characters. I know a little bit from the little bit I've seen, but I'm going to be really fascinated to go watch it now that I have this backstory, right? And I just wanted to touch back on something you mentioned earlier, and how I do really like the idea of these 2 authors just playing in this world, literally in an RPG setting, and then knowing enough and being capable enough and being talented enough to look at it and say, this could be a book. Let's write this book together. Now, I don't know what that process looks like, and I'd be very curious to hear exactly how it goes down, but it is kind of a dream. It is kind of a really cool thing to imagine that you could take a tabletop RPG session and turn it into something like this.
Yeah.
It's inspiring and something that I think does go on. I've heard other authors talk about doing stuff like this in the past, but this is quite an example of a very successful series that's based off of something that started at a tabletop session, potentially. Very cool.
It kind of makes me want to just like really leave it up to the dice, right? Like it makes me want to just go play an RPG and like tell a story, but leave like everything up to the dice roll and then write it. And like, like really leaving an entire story up to just fate of like dice rolls and stuff. Like, obviously that's not what they did, but I just think like how interesting could that be?
Well, I mean, there are people who sometimes, I've read about people who use like a D20 in their writing process and will roll for things. Because awesome. because there is an element of randomness that occurs in tabletop because of dice. There's the things that you want to do, and you've like convinced yourself this is gonna be really fucking cool when I do this, and then you roll a 1, you roll you know what I mean, you roll a critical failure, and then now you have to like pivot and show how your character reacts to failing at doing something that you thought was gonna be really cool. And those elements can be interesting. I don't know that you can craft a whole story behind like the randomness of a die roll, but if every now and then you inject an element of just like pure chance, that could potentially be cool. And I suspect some of the things that happened here might have happened in their tabletop sessions. I would be really curious to know. I don't know if they've ever revealed that. But man, what a great game to be a part of. What about? I wonder if there are other players at the table who aren't these authors, left out. Who are and did any of their ideas get into the books, and how is that addressed? I don't know.
I can already tell you how it went down. There was one other player who was playing with them. And he was shed, and he rolled a 1. He rolled a critical failure. He got fucking gunned down by a railgun.
Oh man, that'd be like in their tabletop game, he had this like really elaborate arc that went throughout the whole game session, but then he wasn't part of one of the authors, so they just kill him off early, so they don't have to deal with it.
He rolled a 1.
Yeah, maybe, man, maybe. All right, I think this is a good place to stop for this, honestly. I'm excited to be getting into this. I feel like I understand this universe so much more now that I've spent time with it. I've gotten nitty gritty with the world building, and I'm really into this, man. I'm glad that we're getting into it. I'm glad I get to spend a month talking about this stuff and learning more.
Yeah. Yeah. I this was a welcome project, because although we have covered sci-fi before, this kind of sci-fi has been a really long time. If you consider Altered Carbon the same kind of in the same vein of sci-fi, which I don't even know that I do. It's different in ways,
Maybe
but this is like very sci-fi. I don't know. It's like a classically sci-fi story, and like I'm enjoying it a lot.
It's a space opera. You know what I was thinking it's going to be an interesting setup for is when we cover Dune next year. Because that is like a much older space opera, but it's kind of the granddaddy space opera in some sense. Like a lot of people look up to that as one of the prototypes. And it'll be interesting to see that, like, kind of go back from something here. And I bet there's going to be things we identify and go like, oh, looks like, they were referencing this, and maybe stuff we're not catching now that will become clear after we go back and cover that. So that'll be something to kind of keep an eye on next year.
Very excited for that.
All right, man. I think let's go ahead and thank Simone C., who is a patron of our show. And thank you to all our patrons for your support. They just did a little thing on Patreon that's like a thank you to Patrons Day. And I know it's kind of lame to just hop on a hashtag, but it is something that we truly feel, right? And you guys really do help keep this show going, and we really do appreciate all your support. So we tweeted out our thanks, and it is definitely true that we feel a lot of gratitude for that. If you wanted to figure out how to become one yourself, go to patreon.com/inktofilm. You can get access to all kinds of bonus content on there and other things. Check it out, and you can see what we're offering.
Yeah, anytime we can get an excuse to thank you guys, we would like to. So thank you.
Right.
Connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All of those at Inktofilm. And join the Council of Inklings, because we post polls and any sort of project news that we see coming up, any adaptation stuff. It's been a great way to keep up with a lot of the adaptation news that's been coming out. So check that out.
Absolutely. And if you wanted to help the show out, but you didn't want to have to pay any money, ratings and reviews on whatever platform you use are always greatly appreciated. Help get us to 100 reviews on iTunes. That would be an awesome number to hit.
Thank you to Ross Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music. And thank you to Jennifer Delazana for providing our transcripts.
Absolutely. All right, man. I am ready to get into this show. I'm going to be excited to learn about the showrunner. I don't know who it is, and I know that it's been hopping around to different networks, so I'm sure there's going to be some interesting details to talk about there. I'm excited for it.
Yeah, it's on Amazon, so if anybody's ready for a rewatch in anticipation of season 4, definitely jump on with us.
Absolutely. The best time you could possibly do it. All right. Until then.
Thanks for listening.